TechCon. So glad to be here with you all today. Looking forward to what I think will be a very interesting and lively conversation. Again, I'm Amy Blackshaw. I'm VP of Product and Technical Marketing at Bitdefender. I want to make sure you can hear me. I see a muted sign. You can hear me. Okay, great. I'm VP of Product and Technical Marketing at Bitdefender. And I have spent the past about 15 years in leading and growing different product teams in cybersecurity. Spent about a dozen years at RSA Security. And again, I'm very happy to be here with our panel of distinguished guests that I would like to introduce and invite to introduce themselves. So Jonathan, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I'm Jonathan Kimmitt. I'm CISO of the University of Tulsa here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I've been CISO 8 years or so, and I primarily deal with all of the security side and privacy here at the university, whether it be privacy compliances or the technical security or strategic security that we do. So I'm really excited to be here.
Fabulous. Great. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Steve Winterfeld. I'm the advisory CISO for Akamai. So I work with our customers to make sure, our WAF or microsegmentation, those things are supporting them, and work with the product side on where we should be going. My background is I was the CISO for Nordstrom Bank and a lot of Nordstrom infrastructure. And yes, my wife misses that discount. And then I went over to Charles Schwab and I was the head of IR and incident response, as well as work some DoD contracts.
Great. I would miss that discount too. I understand your wife's pain. And Reet, last but not least, over to you.
Hi everyone. I'm Reet Kaur. I'm currently a Chief Information Security Officer at one of the largest higher ed institutes in Oregon, Portland Community College, where we serve more than 75,000 students and 6,000 employees. Here, I am leading the information security program, which is focused on risk reduction, but I'm also coming with 20 plus years of experience in IT and information security in Fortune 100 to 500 companies like Nike and Fidelity. So I also miss those discounts at Nike. And I'm also currently a board of director with Women in Cybersecurity. I'm very passionate about closing not just the talent gap in cybersecurity, but also the gender gap.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, again, looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for being here, and let's jump in. So the first question I have, Reet, I'll actually stay with you. And security is obviously one of the fastest moving and demanding industries today. And therefore, the CISO role is one of the most demanding executive leadership roles to fill. Now, I know in the conversations that I have in conferences and when I go out and meet our partners and our customers, and all of the conversations that I have with leadership teams, I hear a lot about how CISOs need to be business leaders and speak more of the board's language. However, we also know that sometimes security practitioners complain that CISOs aren't often technical enough. Talk about a rock and a hard place, right? How do you see the role of the CISO, and how do you approach it from those two vantage points?
Yeah, so since I'm coming from a business background and then I merged into the security side of the house, so I think I'm a little bit at an advantage there. I agree with you that I think that CISOs need to wear multiple hats. It's like as if we need to be bilingual. We need to understand the language of the business, and we need to understand the language on the technology side, security side, so that we can be great translators, because that is what our key job is, to translate the technical risk to the business risk and vice versa, so that the business understands what are the technical risks in plain business terms, and the technology also. I think we need to understand our technology stack. Otherwise, we won't be able to guide our teams in the right direction.
That's great. Great. Jonathan, I'll throw it over to you. Your thoughts on how you sort of see the CISO role in these two different sides of the hat you have to wear.
I think it's situational specific, honestly. Some organizations need to have that technical CISO. Some organizations have to have that strategic CISO. Some organizations have to have the business CISO. I mean, the reality is our job as CISOs is to protect people, to protect our organization and protect our people. And in the situation where a CISO walks into an organization or a department or a situation, they really have to be that chameleon. They really have to, there are times where they have to be that technical person, whether they're standing in front of an infrastructure team and you're trying to convince them to do a specific technical thing. They don't necessarily have to have all the technical background, but they need to know that point. They need to know all the pieces of that to be able to discuss with them. And they need to be able to walk out of that room immediately into the boardroom and be able to understand the communication style. They need to understand the needs and the wants of the board members, and they need to be able to adapt. I know a lot of technical CISOs in very small organizations, and they always talk about they're not at that board level. They're not at that strategic level or at that business level. And my question is, why not? Just step into it, go and ask questions, be part of the decision-making process for them, with them. And once you kind of get in that mode of you need to become that, you need to grow into that, then you start picking up those pieces, of being more business minded in the decision making, more strategic minded in the strategy of the organization. And in some cases, you got to do the other way. I came from a business and law enforcement background. I went into a help desk, and then I went into security. So I've got a variety of backgrounds that kind of fed into what I do. But it's no one is good at one thing until they do it, and they've got to work on it, and they've got to try, and they've got to practice, and you got to get better at it. So I think CISOs nowadays, they really need to be, they need to be what their organization needs them to be. They need to be comfortable with becoming that person, that chameleon of those positions.
That's great. So we've heard chameleon, we've heard translator, right? Wearing different hats. Steve, what are your thoughts on the topic?
So you never ask anybody if the CFO needs to understand how finance works. And there's a reason for that is, CISOs, a lot of us came out of technology and we became technical advisors, not business partners. And there was frustration because some CISOs early in our development would go talk to the board about technology and not business risk. And they would not come up with ideas how to make customer experience less, or arduous, reducing friction by figuring out how to identify customers through metadata. That's where the CISOs need to be. It needs to be that balance of a solid leader, a solid technologist, and a solid business partner, understanding how we make revenue so we can evaluate risk. So I think we've earned the question because we've been advisors and not business partners. And like Jonathan said, and everybody, we're changing, we're adapting, and we're coming to the table as a business partner more and more.
One thing though, I'll caution, when we have CISOs or people who are wanting to become CISOs in organizations, especially in the audience, and I've had to deal with this in my organization. I've worked with a lot of CISOs had to do this. Sometimes you do have to disrupt business. Sometimes you have to be that person that says, no, you can't do this. One particular situation, we had leadership, not here, it was somewhere else. And they said they want to do this thing. And I had to be the one that comes in and says, well, that's illegal. You can't do that. So I think that being that person who is at that business level, they understand the business, they work with the business. I think they also need to garner trust in that business by being that expert or being that how did you say it, Steve? You said the advisor. That's it. You have to be that advisor because sometimes you have to say no. You have to say, no, you can't do this. We can find an alternative, or sometimes, no, you just can't. This is illegal. You can't do, or this will get someone hurt. You can't do it. So I think that there is that trust factor there as you're working with the business, because sometimes you got to be the opposite. You've got to be the one that disrupts that business.
Yeah, and I will emphasize the other thing you said as well, which is that constant learning. When you talk about privacy, data localization laws are changing. You constantly got to be learning. If you don't want to be a lifelong learner, this is the wrong field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cybersecurity across the board, right? Right. It's so dynamic. You have to be able to be invested in your own continual learning, or you'll fall behind. That's a great point. Well, and let's take this question and sort of flip it to the other side, because I'll start with you, Reet, again. It's been a long complaint that boards and executive leadership teams don't understand the risk that cyber poses to the business, right? So CISOs are being asked to understand the business, understand technology, understand risk, understand security. But for a long time, it's been harder to get the board and our executive leadership teams to understand the risk. Do you still see this as a problem? And what have been sort of the key to your success in communicating up when you need to?
Yeah, so one thing I would like to say is that I think when we are talking to the board, and everybody likes stories, and stories in your own verticals. So for example, Jonathan can relate to this. So there is every year we get research. There is this organization called EDUCAUSE. So we have research which comes up. So we use that research to show how these new level of threats are impacting the higher ed institutes. And I know that, every industry has these different researches which come out. So for example, Verizon, they come up with their research every year. So we have been using that as a front go to take our case every time we go and present to the board. The other thing I would say is that when you are going and asking for any funding, how do you vouch for that? How can you show the value? So there is something called as ROSI, which is return on security investments. How can you show that the investment in security, which you are going to be asking for, how will that benefit the business in meeting its strategic goals? So it has been a success for us just because we have been, whatever we present to the board, it is in risk language and return on investment language. That has been a success for us.
That's great. Steve, your thoughts on the topic of communicating to the board and ELT?
So, first of all, I'm going to echo a lot of what she said. So without repeating it, I'll kind of try to expand on it, but dead on there. I think if you're just starting to move to think about briefing a board for the first time, obviously the first thing you want to do is find out who the board loves and have them be your mentor. The second thing you want to do is find out how the board's been trained to think about risk. And don't retrain them in some language you like, but go talk to them in the language the company uses to talk about risk. Use similar charts, use similar formulas, language. And then more and more businesses depend on technology to be successful. I can't think of very many companies that don't have some, IT, OT infrastructure. And so you're seeing fewer and fewer Luddites on boards. If they want to understand how the company works and their competitive advantage, they have to understand the supply chain, the IT infrastructure, omni-channel, whatever industry you're in. And the last part is, if you've seen the SEC rule that, boards are going to have cyber expertise on them, and you think, oh, look at me, I'm going to be on a board soon, I would encourage you to go get training, because again, if you're on a board, you shouldn't be talking about technology. You should be talking about risk. You should be talking about business. Go get certified as a director. Learn to talk, as we've said, like a business partner, not a technology advisor.
And one more thing I would like to add, these are some great points, by the way, Steve. So I think that we should not be only thinking about that time, at a quarterly basis that we are going and presenting to the board. We should build relationship out of that meeting as well. We need to have one-on-one conversations with these board members to see and seek that level of trust and see who can be our cheerleader. And one more thing where Steve called out, this SEC's new regulation that, all the publicly traded companies need to have CISOs on their board. I agree. I think that the boards themselves are not ready for these CISOs to join them, because these CISOs need to understand the language of risk, as well as they need to understand the language of finance as well, to be able to verse with the board members.
Jonathan, your thoughts on the topic?
I'm going to kind of veer off because I agree everything with Reet and Steve said. I mean, it's absolutely true, but I've got some unique experiences with our board. I've had changeover in our boards. I think our board has completely changed over in the last few years, twice, 3 times, at least on the audit committees and such, audit and risk committee. But one of the things that I always try to tell people is your board is made up of people. These are individuals. These are people who they have questions, and it's you're going to have questions, and they want to interact. They're social, so a lot of it comes down to garnering trust from another individual. They have to trust you, and you have to trust them. And one of the things that I've used, that I've encouraged people to use, and I've used myself, is if you know any magicians, anybody that likes doing magic tricks, they always have tricks prepared. They always have some cards in their pocket. They may have a special coin, maybe a gimmick ring. They always have something prepared. Well, when I talk to CISOs and I myself, when I walk into that board, I want to be prepared. I want to be completely prepared. If they ask a question, I want to be able to demonstrate. If they say, and this has happened to me, Jonathan, what you're talking about, that's great, but can you show us what that means? Absolutely. Let me plug in my laptop and jump onto this box. I hacked a machine live, which I don't encourage doing live for the board, but I hacked it live one day in the middle of a board meeting, and they loved it. They pure luck. Again, don't ever do that. That's a bad idea. But you do need to have things prepared. If there a question or a conversation starts up and they want to see, well, can you show us when you say logs, what does that mean? Absolutely. Here, let me log in real quick. So having that preparation, what that does is you can answer their questions even on the fly. That means they begin to trust you. They may not know the technical pieces. They may not care about the technical pieces, but they know it. They trust you. So that conversation will change at that point, because again, you're talking from a person to a person. If they trust you and you say, this is a risk, this is what we need to do to change this risk, or if they bring up a conversation of, I heard this from this news article, you need to be prepared to answer it. You need to have all that information, be ready, because you're trying to engage with a person. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you can garner that trust, then that cooperation that happens between the IT security side, the privacy side, the board side, the business side becomes much, much easier.
You mean when there's a cyber story on NPR, you just automatically start telling the board the answer?
I have done that in the past, yes.
I love it. Preparation's key.
And one thing I would say is that you might not know everything. Sometimes there might be instances where they might ask a question and you might not have an answer to that. So be open and vulnerable and tell them that, okay, I need to do some more research and I will get back to you. So get back to them later.
Yep, absolutely.
Great point. Okay, staying on the theme a little bit about organizational structure, how we're organized, how we relate to other people in the organization. I think over time, we have seen an evolution of where the CISO reports to and the security team reports to, from the CIO, and it's changed, and it's different in industry and organization, obviously. Where do you guys think the CISO and the security team should live in a company's organizational structure? Steve, I'll throw it over to you to start.
And I'm going to expand the question a little. There are two big things out there. One is, how important is the title of CSO or CISO? There are a lot of companies that don't necessarily do that. And most companies that have a CISO, you are a card-carrying officer. You're not a true officer with fiducial responsibilities. And the second is, where do you report up into? I think there's some industry here that it makes a difference. Most industries, if the CIO is a strong business leader, I think that makes sense. There are some industries that you'll see a predominance of CISOs going up to the CFO or the COO, maybe in manufacturing. And then some are going into the CEO. I think this is a cultural question and almost depends on the company. I would be more worried about, am I working for somebody I trust, respect, and is a true member of the decision committee on making business go forward?
Good points. Jonathan, your thoughts?
I think, like Steve said, every organization is different. The balance of power, kind of what people talk about, is different in every organization. Whether you're a low-level technical CISO that reports to a director of IT, who reports to a CIO, who reports to a CEO, who reports to the board, okay, if you can still do the job and you can still protect people, great. If you're that CISO that reports directly to the board, but you don't have any funding, you don't have any staff, you don't have anything, then, that's a problem. So I think every organization is a little different. I think the most important part is making sure that if you are in a CISO position, or if you're in a leadership position in terms of security or privacy, that you can make change. If you can't make the organization change, whether it be subtle changes over time through social, cultural changes, it doesn't matter. If you can't make a change in an organization, then it's not a good position. That's what I talked about earlier about saying no. Sometimes you just have to say no. I had a friend who, he went into an organization as a CISO, got paid a lot of money. He tried to get one thing changed, and they just flat said no. I think it was his executive team had admin rights or something, something we all deal with. And they actually came to him and says, "You're just a figurehead here. Don't try to be making any changes in our organization." And he left. So those sorts of things are something you have to take into consideration. I think the whole idea of where the CISO sits is important if it's important in the organization. If it's not important in the organization, if people trust you and you can make changes, then honestly, I could be the lowest level person and still protecting people. I'm fine with that. So that's just my thought on it.
Ability to drive impact is far more important.
Absolutely.
Reet, anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, so one thing is, as we all know, that if any org is not secure, their business will not move fast, right? So I think we need to be cautious about what kind of message which we are trying to deliver to our executive team as well as the board of directors. Is that same message being transferred to them or not? Or it's basically getting missed, just like Chinese whisper or a telephone tag game. So I agree with both Jonathan and Steve that culture really drives where the CISO should be reporting to. So for example, I'm currently reporting into a CIO, and that CIO, he understands business risk. He is a great partner to work with, and that is why we have been successful at driving the program. But if you don't have, if you're not reporting into your own cheerleader, that can be a challenge. Great.
Thanks, everyone. All right, we're going to switch gears just slightly on topics, and let's talk a little bit about threats and two highest profile threats, that can't open a newspaper or a web browser and not see on some type of headline is ransomware and supply chain, right? Have these two types of threats impacted your planning and execution in your roles? And if so, how? Reet, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so if I take a look at ransomware as well as supply chain, see, in security, we do have to take layered approach. If we talk about ransomware, we all know that most of the organizations who did get impacted by ransomware attacks, where the files get encrypted, their data backups were sitting in the same network. And because of that, their data backups also got encrypted. So there was no way that they could recover those files. So it is important for us to plan so that at least our backups cannot be touched at that time. So how can we do that? We can create, air-gapped backups, but we also need to think about, it's not just our data backups. Like, do we need to separate out our data backups to, or like, do we need to create a separate copy of our Active Directory backup so that if in case our data backups get encrypted, we want to be able to log into our environment. If our Active Directory backups are also logged, we won't be able to log in. So we have separated out our data backups and our Active Directory backups, and both are air-gapped. On the supply chain issue, I think the biggest thing is that we need to know inventory-wise, what do we have in our environment? And right now, SBOM is helping us, which is bill of materials, software bill of materials. So we need to know what kind of libraries, like, when we are getting from third-party vendors any applications, what kind of libraries are embedded in those applications itself, so that if there are any vulnerabilities which come out, we are able to patch. So for example, when there have been instances when there have been vulnerabilities which come out, sometimes people struggle in figuring out what kind of vulnerabilities are in their environment. So we need to know exactly what is in our environment.
Makes sense. Jonathan, thoughts on ransomware, supply chain?
Absolutely. I think I think the question, ransomware and supply chain attacks are symptoms of a larger problem. One of the questions that always comes up is pay or no pay on ransomware. And I was in a meeting where we were talking about that, and it got to me, and I was like, if you're having to decide that question, your security has failed. So exactly what Reet said. When we're talking about ransomware or supply chain, let's pick ransomware. If you don't have good backups, if you don't have things patched, if you're not doing a good security awareness program, if you're not doing all these other things, the effect is ransomware. The symptom is you got caught with ransomware. So you really need to go to the very, that very fundamental level of security to make sure you're doing all the right things. And then that may prevent ransomware in the future. Now, there's no guarantee to that, but I can tell you that when you look at organizations that have gotten ransomware, you can always go back to a root cause analysis and say, yeah, you weren't doing your Windows updates, were you? You didn't have segmentation, were you? You didn't have, privileged access management, did you? So those sorts of things. Now that's a very broad stroke, and I understand that, but it really is. I think ransomware is a symptom. Supply chain, that one's it's a little different, but I think the fundamental security concepts are still in play here. Just like Reet said, you got to know who's in your environment, who has access to your data, who has access to your systems. If you're not doing the fundamentals there, then yeah, the symptom is you could be the victim of an attack through your supply chain. So I think in both those cases, you get back to the fundamental concepts of security. You pick your framework that you like, your favorite thing, and you start looking, what do you got? What are you doing? Are you doing the right things? And if you're doing that, if you focus on that, I think sometimes those symptoms later on becomes less and less and less.
Yeah, and I would like to add something to what Jonathan said. So when we are talking about, we need to know exactly who is in our environment, right? Like now that network parameter has kind of dissipated. Now we have identity as a parameter. If like, our credentials were stolen and if the adversary is inside our environment, now how will we figure that out? Like, we need to have a good insider threat program as well to figure that out. So.
Yep. And when you were talking about backups, one of the things that I always talk to people, because I ask them all the time, if I go in, I'm doing consulting or if I'm engaging someone, do you have backups? Oh, yeah. Well, we got backups. Like, do you really have backups? Oh, yeah. Have you tested your backups? Well, yeah. Have you tested your backups to full production? Oh no, we've never done that. I've got a friend who we sometimes talk on different panels from the FBI, and we were talking on a panel, and he couldn't really share a lot of information on the panel because it's investigations and whatever. But the one thing he did share, because we were talking about backups at the time, and I did that. Do you have backups? Do you really have backups? And he just started giggling. Which, if you've ever heard an FBI agent giggle, it's really amusing to me. But he says, yeah, we go in all the time to organizations that have been attacked, and we ask them about their backups, and they swear up and down that they have backups. Then they try to recover from them, and they have missed a dependency, or they weren't checking them. They checked them last year, but they didn't check them last month. And, and there's so many times that you just get caught because you didn't do the basics. You didn't check your backups.
And so don't forget the guy that had the keys or the password left the company.
Exactly. So I think that is super critical when we're talking about to organizations is, are you doing security controls? Are you really? Can we check? Can we verify? Can we, all these different things. I do that here. If someone says they're doing something, I'm the first one there. Is all right, let's show me, and that's one of the interesting things about CMMC. If you guys have to do CMMC at all, in terms of your organizations, they really are going to not just tell me that you're doing something, but show me you're doing it. And I think that's super critical and super important for organizations to be able to do.
Yeah, that's great. Steve, anything to add on the ransomware or supply chain readiness?
And so for me, I'm huge on building programs, people, processes, technology. The processes are really important. And so I love some different frameworks. If you're talking about zero trust, I love NIST 800-207. If you're talking about how to measure the maturity of your SOC, I love the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If we're talking about ransomware, I like the cyber kill chain. And we don't have time for me to explain what it is here. I've done a talk on Bright Talk on it if you're interested. But really, when we look at the multiple points you can interdict and break an attack sequence, you can stop it at the edge. You can stop it, she mentioned credentials. You can have MFA. You can have a WAF in front of your systems to stop the reconnaissance. The lateral spread, you can have microsegmentation to stop that lateral spread. A secure web gateway or DLP to stop that exfil. The second part on ransomware is, remember, ransomware is a two-phase attack now. They're stopping your access or your availability. They're also attacking confidentiality by stealing data and offering to sell it back or publicize it. So I encourage people to treat ransomware like a breach on day one and assume data loss until you can prove it wasn't. And then the last thing is, when we're talking about supply chain, something like, Log4j, again, microsegmentation where you can see the data flows, you can see where those dependencies are. You can quickly segment those off, but you're also going to have to think as a leader about your third party. Be very close to your vendor management team and have a process for your vendor management to go out with you and make sure all your supply chain is secure. So exercise and is that last thing. Any process you have that you haven't exercised and validated in a legitimate way, Jonathan, dead on, you don't have a process.
Yeah, so much. And it's so interesting just to pick up on a lot of the themes, Steve, that you brought up. There's a lot of technology available, right? The second leg is process, right? Have you tested it? Have you proved it? And of course, the third leg is people, right? Like, how do you ensure that the technology you're bringing on board is doing what it should do, is being monitored, processes are being followed, that you're proving things, not just checking the box and saying, yes, we have backups, right? And a lot of this is held together by the human element. And I think, one of the themes that has been prevalent for the past at least decade, if not longer, is, cyber skills and cyber resources are, in a shortage. We constantly are hearing this theme. So I'll stick with you, Steve, as we talk about this question is, how are you approaching this problem of cyber skills? Or do we have a resource gap? Do you look at only in-house teams? Do you look at managed services? How are you looking at solving this problem? And once you get people in seats, how do you retain talent, especially in today's remote environment? So lots of questions in there, but tell us about the human element of your program and how you're dealing with changes today.
So I think I'll take it as kind of a journey. The first is your pipeline. People want to work somewhere that has a good reputation, where the culture is positive. Your staff is one of your greatest recruiting tools. Also, if you're in a large company that has, for instance, a call center or a help desk, there's a potential to have a pipeline from organizations like that, where you're creating a path and letting them know what skill sets and providing a mentor or a coach. And so, and having one of your people go be a coach, you're not going to get a better way to make your people stronger than make them teachers. And so, that's step one, is build that pipeline. Number two is retain. People leave for more money. People take a phone call to be open to listening to an opportunity because they don't feel cared for or they feel at risk, in my opinion. And so if somebody's in a job where they enjoy coming to work, where they feel like their leadership cares about them, where they feel like they have a future and the company is investing in them, they generally won't take a phone call. As soon as somebody starts taking phone calls, you're going to lose them. That's just been my experience. And then the last is, as I said, have a way to develop the people you do have. Invest in them, have them grow. I forget who said it, but I love the statement that the half-life of a cyber skill set is 18 months. So you've got to be investing, sending them to the education institutions like these guys are running is critical. Investing in certification, whatever it is, that's where I tend to put my focus.
That's great. That's great. Jonathan, over to you. How do you think about the skills and resources on your team, and how are you managing change in the human element of your program?
So I've got two pieces that I deal with. I've got my staff, my security analysts that work for me, and when I took over as CISO, I kind of laid out a couple of different things. One of the things that I laid out is one of my requirements to work for our department is you have to get a certification a year. And we pay for it, whether it be SANS or some other one that has to be related to your job, of course. But I require them that they have to do the class and take the test. Now, the first time, it was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. They were very, as everyone else is, but on their second one, they were coming to me like, hey, we want to take these classes. We want to learn this. We want to grow here. We need to, and they came out with their certification path of what they wanted to do. And I have input and we engage and we talk. And it's like, well, this is what I really need you to do. So we're going to do this training. But what I have found is people maybe makes a little bit less in terms of their salary, but I'm giving them as much as I can in terms of skill sets. One of the big things that I've always said is I don't want someone who is a lifer. I don't want someone who works here who can't work anywhere else. So I'm going to give them skill sets, and I'm going to make them marketable and to do whatever I can to keep them, because that's the type of person I need working for me, is strong, skilled, good decision makers, all of those things. So you really invest a lot in your team. Now, the other side I have is students. I have a SOC that I hire primarily students to work, and they're part-time, because they're students. And one of the things that I'm really trying to do is I'm taking these students, regardless of the program they're in cyber program, the old MIS programs, those sorts of things. And they come in and I'm giving them hands-on of live data, live products, enterprise level softwares that we're using on our firewalls, on our ATP and Microsoft, all these things. And it's worth it for me to spend the time to teach them and train them, because they turn around and they absorb so much, and they gather so much from that process that they turn around. They're some of our best producers in terms of threat intelligence, in terms of threat analysis, in terms of security control analysis. And what I've always said is I want them to be able to leave this organization when they graduate, and they're going to walk into an entry-level job, and they're going to have 2 to 4 years experience in cybersecurity, not just classwork, but actual hands-on work in live environments. And I want to help them do I'm hoping that their resumes, when they're stacked side by side someone else in a program, that they get moved up just a little bit because they've got that hands-on experience and real stuff. What I get out of it is I've got great SOC analysts analyzing what's happening in our network, coming to us, filtering through all that stuff, saying, hey, here's a problem, we need to go fix it. And then we can go fix it. So those are the way that I do it here in our organization.
That's great. Building the pipeline for all of us. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Reet, over to you.
Yeah, I will start with some of the survey numbers. So IDC came up with, they did a research where they said that 30% of the companies they surveyed, they said that they are dealing with lack of resources in cloud security right now. And then, Gartner says that more than 85% of the companies are going to be in cloud by 2025. So with this huge transformation and this lack of resources in cloud security, we are also building the pipelines from our student community. We actually, and earlier when we were talking about, okay, what is important to the board? All this ties back together, especially for Jonathan, because when we took this initiative to the board that we are trying to build this pipeline, this was a huge win, where board also understands today that these days, if we look at job descriptions, for entry-level positions, they are asking for 3 to 5 years of experience. So when we give this experience to our students, it's a win-win situation for both us and for our cybersecurity program, because it is giving that skill set to get a jump start for these students to get into the actual workforce. So we are doing a little bit of that, as well as where Jonathan said that, he is encouraging his team to get certifications. So initially, when I joined this role, I was getting a lot of pushback because people don't want change. But now people are, my employees, they are recognizing that this is for their own benefit. And when we talk about retaining the talent, one thing which my managers also do is that I have trained them on doing SWOT analysis. It's a partnership-based exercise with the employees, where we look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the employee will come up with that assessment. And based on that, we will align the work according to that for them, as well as we will also send them for training, because we don't have many incentives apart from training these employees. So I really think that that has been the win for us in having a great team in my organization.
And I do want to circle back and add one thought. The other thing I'm doing more of is when I'm deciding on which vendor I want to work with, one of the criteria I'm continuously thinking about is, can I buy engineering support and can I buy managed services? And even if I don't on day one take advantage of both those, I tend to lean towards vendors that give me that opportunity in the future. The more flexibility I have, the better off I am.
And I love that point. Thank you for bringing it up because I absolutely forgot. One thing is there that when we talk about lack of resources, we should not feel shy in asking for help. And these third-party vendors, when we talk about either MSSPs, MDRs, or incident response retainers, we should have all that backup. Like, I think that especially in education, we don't have that many resources. So we need to partner with these third-party companies. When we say that, okay, there is this lack of cloud resources in cloud security, how can we fill that gap? Let's go and partner with a third-party vendor, but we need to be careful at even these partnerships because there are, so many vendors out there for providing same service. How do you select that vendor? You want to make sure that that vendor is they understand your business, they understand your culture so that they can provide you the right kind of help when you need.
And I was blown away at RSA when I saw the vendor space at RSA had grown by a third. It wasn't there were fewer vendors after COVID in cybersecurity. There were a lot more. It is daunting.
And one last thing I would like to add is that when we are talking about creating a SOC, right? So having a SOC in-house versus partnering with a third-party vendor, we need to think about, okay, do we even have the money, the resources? Because if we want to have 24/7 SOC, we will need to have at least 12 people to create that SOC. So we need to think about that balance. Sorry, Jonathan, you were going to say something.
No. I agree for that, especially on the SOC. That's one of the things, when I was going to build this SOC, I did not come from a SOC. I had no experience in it. So I did the trainings. I went and did, I won't give vendor names, but I went to some very large trainings to learn about SOCs. And I visited SOCs and I talked to other higher eds that had SOCs and what I found is either most people are doing it because that's what they've always done and that's all they know, or they had no clue why they did it. That's just what the industry said. And I wanted my SOC to be different and I built it different. And I've got a lot of organizations now that are clamoring to get our students because it's not just SOC analysts. They do a lot more. And that's what I wanted. But one of the things I was going to talk about, Steve made a comment about vendors and anybody that does vendor management from an IT security side. I make vendors have the same requirements that I do in terms of qualified, professionally trained security professionals, because you don't ever know what you're going to get. And I ask that from any managed service provider that we have, but also any vendor that gets our data. If we're doing a data agreement or anything like that, I want them to do the same process. Do they have professional, dedicated security staff? Do they get regular professional training? And that professional is really, really important. It's not just Googling an answer. It's actually, do they get trained on this stuff? But the reason why I do that is because, I've had vendors where I say, hey, do you have a security staff? Yeah, we do. Like, okay, who is it? It's this person. And then later in the HECVAT, I find that person is also the CTO and it's also their primary programmer. It's also this. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. One person can't be everything. That's not fair to that person. That's not fair to the organization, but I'm not going to trust my organization's data to an organization that has one person doing all of IT and IT security. So that's one of the things that I always, be careful on is, when you're working with your vendors, make sure that they have the same level of professionalism in terms of security that you are going to be doing in your environment or you want them to do, because sometimes they don't.
Yes, and that's why vendor risk assessments are highly important.
Absolutely.
One thing, and Jonathan, you mentioned that you came from help desk. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I came from help desk.
So that is another point which I wanted to raise is that when we are hiring, when we are looking for that skill set, we need to think how we can transfer the prior skill sets into current security skill sets, because we in my organization, we hired a student. She worked for forensic psychologist for many years, and today she's a forensic analyst on our team, and she is doing an awesome job.
Yep. That's the thing that I try to get across people. Security, the concept of security is not entry level. It's someone that has come, maybe good security professionals have a little bit of background in something. Maybe they come from a call center, or they come from networking, they come from project management, they come from policy and procedure, maybe they come from legal. You've got to have a little bit of background in some of these topics to be successful in some of the things that we do. So when I talk to people, and that's what I wanted to do with the students, I wanted to give them that background. I wanted to give them, security isn't necessarily entry level. You got to have a little bit of experience somewhere to be able to adapt to the things that we do in security.
It's great conversation, and so many transferable skills, right? And across so many different areas. Very interesting. Thank you all. So I have one last question that I'm going to try to get us to do it sort of rapid fire, because we do have questions from the audience, and we have about 9 minutes. So rapid fire answer. Last question. Can you tell us the biggest lesson that you have learned in your time in your role? And Jonathan, I'll start with you.
Everything we do is about people. We're protecting people, we're interacting with people. The board is people, your leadership is people. If we start focusing on the fact that we're dealing with people, then I think it changes the mindset a little bit. And that is a good thing. And that's what we should be doing.
That's great. Steve, over to you. Lesson learned.
So this is a team sport. You will be successful if you are a member of a tribe. You have business partners, you have peers, you have people under you. I'm at the point where I have a reverse mentor, network, listen, collaborate.
Wonderful. Reet, over to you.
This is a marathon, not a sprint. So we need to make sure that we are not, and as Jonathan brought up, that it's all about people. We want to make sure that their mental health is also being well thought of, that we are giving them that opening to kind of recharge as well. That is highly important, so that we can sustain this long term, not just short term.
That's great. So get your tribe full of human, form a team, and to run a marathon, not a sprint, and make sure that everyone crosses that in a healthy way. I love it. That's great. Okay, awesome. So we have just over 5 minutes to open up to the audience for questions. So I know we're taking those in through a chat feature, and we already have a couple. So I'll start asking some questions from our audience, and thanks for submitting them. So one that I'll throw it out to see if anyone wants to answer about preferred learning tools and or platforms. Preferred learning tools and or platforms.
So I will also add style. I prefer to read. I know other people do great on YouTube. Some people, last year, I needed an artificial deadline. So I took a course. Otherwise, I kept putting it off. So I think take the time to figure out what your learning style is, and then you'll find the right resources.
Yep, I agree. One of the things that I make all of my staff do is to get a certification. I said this earlier, to get a certification, but they have to do it different ways. So the very first one I did is I gave them a book, and I go, okay, you need to go get Sec Plus. Hey, you got 3 months, go. And then the next one we did was a kind of a remote as online learning, but it was a on-demand learning. The next one was live learning. The next one was, actually going to a boot camp. And I want people to get experience on all those, because exactly what Steve said, you got to find out what you are comfortable with. But the other side is sometimes you have to learn stuff from things that maybe you're not comfortable doing. This is part of the job, especially with troubleshooting or incident response, you've got to overcome. So getting that practice in is, if you don't like reading and it's hard for you, go force yourself to get a certification by reading a book and figure out what you need to do.
I sent one of my SOC analysts to Toastmasters, and it changed his careers.
Yep.
And that is awesome, because earlier when I was talking about that SWOT analysis, so one of our employees also said that, okay, when he talked about his weaknesses, one of his weaknesses was that he does not feel comfortable in front of large audiences. So we sent him for Toastmasters. But as Jonathan mentioned, and Steve also mentioned, so certifications is one thing, learning from, I think, during job shadowing, as well as doing stretch assignments within your organization. So for example, if you are an incident responder, if you want to understand how to do risk assessments, ask for that stretch assignment within your organization. As well as the last thing I would like to mention, which I learned the best from, is networking, as well as doing these kind of panels, so that, these are also learning opportunities where you learn from other panelists.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Okay, so when we were talking about board being prepared for the board, somebody mentioned about being prepared and aware of current events. And so there's a question here around each one of your suggestions for getting the most current info. So where are the data providers? Who do you listen to sort of stay on top so you can share information that's relevant to your board and executive leadership team? Any thoughts on that question?
I spend, well, obviously I have to listen to some things, almost mandatory. You have to subscribe to CRED. You have to connect into your ISACs. I think that's a powerful resource. Financial ISAC, retail, healthcare. It's also a great way to network. And then, the last is, remember to pay attention to industry news, not just security news. Know where your industry is going and where security is going.
Great point.
I will add world news, because a lot of times what's happening in the world will affect cybersecurity and privacy. So you do all those things. And I for my SOC students, I have them go look at world news. What is happening and how is that going to affect the University of Tulsa?
And there are a number of podcasts, daily, weekly, monthly podcasts that you can leverage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one of them is dark reading. I am a huge fan. So as well as, in addition to what was mentioned earlier, I think you need to build your own community as well. Because especially in CISO community, there are these Slack channels, which we are all members of. And it's not just doing partnerships within our organizations, but also doing partnerships outside of our organizations with other CISOs, so that we can be on top of the threats which we are dealing with. And as Steve said, make sure that you are tapped into REN ISAC if you are working in education, FS ISAC if you're in finance, H ISAC if in healthcare. So we need to be well connected in those communities.
I will also throw out CyberWire and the BBC Crypto Queen and Lazarus series.
Hope everyone got those down. Write those resources down. Those are all great. That's all great. Well, I know we're really at the end of our time. So I want to thank our panelists for the lively, educational, and helpful conversation. I've enjoyed it immensely. I know that all of our attendees were able to take something away to help them in their day-to-day. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. It's been lovely to talk to you guys.
Thanks.